I traveled to Naples, Italy for a few weeks to learn how to make authentic Neapolitan pizza from the masters of the craft. And those ancient pizza masters are founded at an organization called AVPN, which translated to English means the Association of True Neapolitan Pizza. And they were founded in 1984 as a preservation effort. Pizza had gone global, and going global had become something other than what the traditionalists in Naples wanted. It was thicker, it was faster, delivered in 30 minutes or it's free. That was before we even got to stuffed crust. The Neapolitans decided to write their recipes down and codify their procedures in every approved ratio, every technique, every step, and they called it the regulation. And I spent 2 weeks at the AVPN headquarters learning those secrets. Most of my classmates, they were serious restaurateurs, like this guy, Michele, who runs the best pizzeria in Belgium and who came to AVPN more for slight refinements to his craft. Not like me, I had to learn everything from scratch. I really had no experience at all in cooking pizza before. So my teacher was this guy named Umberto Moriello, who is a certified AVPN master and a decorated competitor. So he was a silver medalist at the Olympiads for the Verace Pizza Napoletana in their most prestigious category. You know, he's the kind of person who runs a successful pizzeria right outside of Naples and has been teaching the pizzaioli all over Naples and all over the world for some time now. Now, before this trip, I thought the Neapolitan pizza was basically about a few obvious things: a hot oven, good flour, San Marzano tomatoes, fresh mozzarella, don't overdo it. Most of that is true, but it's kind of like saying that tennis is just about like hitting the ball over the net. Yes, the recipe for the Neapolitan pizza can fit on the back of an index card, but the key to an authentic pizza comes through a chain of tiny decisions, tiny rules, tiny acts of restraint. And if you get enough of them right, you get this pizza that feels almost impossibly light, delicate, and alive. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what I learned in that class in Naples about the best practices, the history, and the weird little quirks that make real Neapolitan pizza what it is. And at the AVPN school, we make about 30 to 40 pizzas each day, each person, from about 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is, you know, we've got a little short break for lunch. It's a very un-Italian schedule. And on day one, our teacher Alberto handed us a ball of dough and told us to start pressing. No sauce, no cheese, no pizza, just the dough. Day two was shaping, how to take that ball and open it into a disc without a rolling pin, without tearing it, without losing air pockets, and make the crust what it is. Day three was red pies, so tomato, olive oil, garlic, and oregano. And then finally on day four, we were allowed to use cheese. On day four, all the way to the end of the 2 weeks, that's what we did. And every afternoon, we'd make the dough from scratch, which I'll talk about in a second. And it sounds almost insultingly slow. We're adults after all. We paid to be there. Give us the real pizza. But when we finally made a proper margarita, every one of us understood exactly what we were doing and why, and Umberto had engineered our progression so that each session built on the last and each challenge arrived exactly when we were ready for it. So let's walk through what we learned. Let's start with the flour. That's where most of our pizzas start, right? No matter where you are, even if you're doing Neapolitan or not. And Italian law classifies flour by ash content, which sounds a little weird until you understand what I'm talking about here. So when flour is produced, they take a sample, they put it in an oven at about 600 degrees Celsius for 6 hours, and whatever mineral residue is left behind, those are the ashes. The less ash, the more refined the flour is. And here's the hierarchy. Type 00, which is ashes up to 0.5%. This is the most refined, the whitest, the most delicate. Type 0 is up to 0.65%. Type 1 and 2 are progressively less refined, and then you get to wholemeal, which is ashes between 1.4 and 1.6%. For Neapolitan pizza, we're talking about 00 or 0, but we don't stop there. Italian millers also measure flour by what they call the W value. It's the strength index, a machine invented by a French scientist in the 1920s. This machine was called the Chopin alveograph. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. It inflates a bubble of dough like a balloon and measures how much pressure it takes to pop it. And from that curve, you get a few numbers. P, which is the resistance of the dough and how much it fights back. L, which is the extensibility, how far it stretches before the gluten snaps. And then you get the PL ratio, the ratio between the two, which defines elasticity. For a Neapolitan pizza dough, the ideal PL is 0.6. And so you put this all together. You also have the W, right? When we think about the W, this is the overall strength, the most important number of all. Soft flours are W180 to 200. That's biscuits and waffles. Strong flours, which is W280 to 350, are like the panettone and the brioche, which need to survive long fermentation times. In practice, the target for us in the Neapolitan pizza is a medium strength flour with an ideal range around 250 to 320 W and a PL ratio around 0.6, strong enough to trap fermentation gases and hold structure, flexible enough to stretch thin without fighting you. And here's one more flour fact most people never consider. Flour needs to rest after milling, usually several weeks. So during that time, the enzymes inside the flour break down about 1% of the starch into simple sugars. Those sugars later are going to feed into our yeast during fermentation. And your pizza is, in a very literal sense, a patient process that begins long before you touch the dough. Now let's talk about water. I'm sure you've heard the claim, the reason that Neapolitan pizza tastes better in Naples is the water. I've long heard the same is true about New York, my hometown. Foodies generally nod along when we say this, it's the water. And for years, we treat this as untestable folklore. Now, that myth is a bit overstated, but water quality does matter in one important sense: water hardness. And water hardness is the concentration of dissolved mineral salts, particularly calcium carbonate in the water. And calcium carbonate reinforces the gluten network. Slightly hard water, around 7 to 15 degrees French on the hardness scale, gives the dough structure without it being too rigid. Too hard and your dough becomes stiff and difficult to shape. Too soft and the gluten network is weak and the dough collapses and your pizza is sad. Naples happens to have water in the ideal range, but that condition can be found in other locations, and it's not magic. It's mineral content. You can measure it, and in many cases, you can replicate it. We also need to be concerned about pH of the water. You want your water to be between 6 and 7. So if the water's too alkaline, above 7, that would slow the natural acidification of the dough during fermentation. If the fermentation, and remember that the fermentation itself is an acidification process. If your water is fighting that process, your leavening slows and your flavor suffers. Now let's talk about the dough itself, right? We talked a little bit here, but the official AVPN ingredient ratios when you're making the dough from scratch is salt, 40 to 60 grams, flour, 1,600 to 1,800 grams, yeast, depending on what yeast you're using. We use the AVPN, fresh beer yeast. You want to use 0.1 to 3 grams, depending on things like the humidity and how long you're going to be leaving it to proof. You could use mother yeast at 5 to 20% of the flour weight, or you could use dry yeast at 1/3 the amount of fresh. The sequence here matters. Water goes in first, usually put in a bowl, then salt, and then you wait a little while, and then you add a little flour, and the flour acts as a buffer between the salt and the yeast because the salt kills the yeast. You don't want to put the yeast and the salt together because the direct contact between the two, the yeast and the salt, means that the yeast is inactivated before it ever has a chance to work. We kind of add the flour in what we call a pioggia, like rain, slowly in a stream while you keep mixing. You don't want to dump it all in at once. And what you're doing here is you're hydrating the flour gradually, giving the proteins time to absorb the water and begin forming a gluten network. And the dough is ready when it reaches what AVPN calls the dough point. Glossy, smooth, elastic to the touch. Kind of poke it. If you're using a spiral mixer, you can actually hear it, a crackling sound, and the dough pulls away from the walls. That sound is your signal. Optimal dough temperature throughout this process is 18 to 25 degrees Celsius, ideally 22 degrees. You could use these little chambers that you could store it at. Too cold and the fermentation drags. Too warm and the yeast goes into overdrive and the dough loses elasticity and becomes difficult to handle. Now the dough is going to rest twice. And there's two different purposes for these two different resting periods. The first rest is called the puntatura, or the pointing, or the first fermentation. The entire mass of dough, big mass, is covered with a damp cloth and is left undisturbed. You can even just flip the bowl open and cover it. If you overwork the dough and skip the proper resting, the gluten network will break and the dough becomes too tough, and forming the discs later that we need will become a fight. And during the puntatura, the dough's pH drops as fermentation begins producing acid, and that acidification is not a byproduct to be tolerated. It's a part of what makes Neapolitan dough taste like something. Then comes the staglio, the portioning. After that first resting period, the dough is cut into balls weighing 240 to 280 grams. I think we were at 250 exactly when we were making them. Each ball is shaped with a specific motion. You fold the edges down with your fingers and tighten the bowl with your thumb and forefinger and use the pressure to cut the ball away from the rest of the dough. Then the balls go into a covered food containers and they rest again for at least 6 hours. We did it overnight for the next day. And a well-matured dough ball has a specific quality. You press it gently with your finger. It should be soft and it shouldn't spring back. If it springs back aggressively, it's not done yet. Let's now talk about the disc, right? Sometimes you see, videos of people, especially in the US and in New York, flipping the pizza above their head and all that, or people use a rolling pin in certain videos. We're not going to flip above our head, and we're definitely not going to use a rolling pin because rolling pins crush the air pockets trapped in the dough during leavening. They create non-homogeneous layers, zones where gas concentrates unevenly, separated by pockets of entrapped air, and the result is that we bake unevenly and it lacks the characteristic texture of a true Neapolitan crust. So instead, we're going to form the disc by hand, and we're going to do it below the shoulders, not above our heads. You start with the dough ball on a floured surface, pressing, but not too floured, by the way, just a little bit, pressing a wave-like motion of the fingers from the center downwards, stopping about 1 centimeter from the edge. That centimeter is very important. That's where the cornicone lives, the tall, airy crust. The air you've been carefully preserving through every stage of the process concentrates there. And during cooking, it rises. If you stop too close to the edge, the air escapes, the crust collapses. Then you stretch one hand on the surface, the other lifting and gently pulling the edge. And then you rotate the disc, let gravity assist, confident and gentle, which sounds like a contradiction, but in practice, the same quality. Confidence is what makes the gentleness possible. This comes from a lot of trial and error. Took me a while, many days, maybe 100 pizzas to confidently get to the right sort of spherical shape and the right size. Let's talk about some of the other ingredients. So the mozzarella, the verb mazzare, to cut. It refers to the motion of breaking off individual portions from a large mass of pulled curd, a gesture that's been performed in southern Italy since at least the 12th century. The first documented mention of mozzarella appeared in a cookbook by the papal court chef Bartolomeo Scappi, dating to 1570. AVPN recognizes 2 types of cheese for Neapolitan pizza. The buffalo mozzarella, which is, pretty standard, and it's from the Italian Mediterranean buffalo, which produces milk far richer in fats, proteins, and calcium than cow's milk. The yield is twice that of cow's milk, and the result is a white, elastic, and intensely juicy cheese. And then you have the flor di latte, which is the other acceptable cheese, which is made from cow's milk. And this is slightly acidic, fresh tasting, milky white with hints of straw. No matter what you go with, each requires a different handling of the pizza. Buffalo mozzarella is cut into 5 to 6 millimeter slices, thick enough that it doesn't completely melt and disappear during cooking. The fior di latte is cut into 3 to 4 millimeter strips. Both should be drained before use, because if they're too soggy, it's going to mess with your pizza and your pizza will stick as you're trying to put it in the oven. The olive oil, AVPN specifies extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is defined as oil produced exclusively from the fruit of olive oil trees or olive trees through mechanical processes only, with a free acidity of no more than 0.8 grams per 100 grams, no chemicals, no refining. The AVPN handbook cites an actual study comparing extra virgin olive oil, regular olive oil, and sunflower oil on pizza, raw and after cooking at 380 to 400 degrees Celsius for 90 seconds. And their findings were that even after intense heat treatment, extra virgin olive oil retained significantly more of its aromatic compounds, its polyphenols, and its antioxidant activity than the alternatives. The bitter and spicy notes that you taste in good extra virgin olive oil are identifiable on the back of the tongue and through the nose. Those are indexes of high polyphenol concentration. Those are quality markers. The oil goes on the pizza in a spiral motion from the center outwards using a special copper. It's like a cruet, no more than 7 grams. And it's the last thing you do before the pizza goes into the oven. As it relates to ovens, the AVPN has a website where you can see what's an acceptable oven or not. The most authentic are wood-fired ovens, mostly constructed in Naples. They do allow for gas and electric ovens, and they have certain approved ovens. And they even have blessed the uni oven if you have no other alternative. So for those of you who are doing this at home, you can use your uni oven to get to the right temperature and produce something close enough to a Neapolitan pizza. And actually at the AVPN, they have tons of different ovens. One of them is a uni oven. There are two pizzas that the AVPN recognizes as true Neapolitan that they teach at this academy in the sort of the main program that they have. One is the marinara pizza. So this is the older of the two. This was historically eaten by fishermen because it kept well without cheese, no mozzarella, just peeled tomato, garlic, oregano, extra virgin olive oil. That's it. And then you have the margarita, which is named after Queen Margherita of Savoy in 1889. It's deliberately designed in the colors of the Italian flag. According to folklore, I'm not sure this is true. Red tomato, white mozzarella, green basil, 50 to 80 grams of peeled tomatoes, right? That you're going to crush by hand. You're going to take some of the impurities out. 80 to 100 grams of buffalo mozzarella or fior di latte, fresh basil leaves, extra virgin olive oil in that spiral. The tomato goes on first. Spread from the center outwards in a clockwise rotary motion of the wrist, leaving the edges free. The mozzarella next. Basil, ideally tucked under the cheese. Oil is last in a spiral, and then into the wood fire oven it goes. You're going to have to practice that motion. I won't talk too much about that. The temperature is approximately 450 to 500 degrees Celsius. You want to be somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds. That's it. So the whole thing from a dough bowl to a finished pizza takes about 90 seconds. Everything else, the flour resting in the middle, the water buffering the gluten, the 2 fermentation phases, the 6-hour second rest, all of that happens so that the 90 seconds can work. Now, at the end of the AVPN school, we had our final exam. We were to make exactly one pizza with no do-overs while a 3-judge panel of Neapolitan pizzaioli, so the experts, watched us, and then they tasted our pizza. My final score was an 86 out of 100, so I passed. I'm not, going to go out there and wow anybody and become like a mega expert. But after the 2 weeks, I can make an acceptable Neapolitan pizza. My major deductions came because I forgot to test how hot the oven was before I started. It wasn't hot enough. So instead of taking about 60 seconds to cook, it took about 3 minutes. If you have any more comments or questions about how to make this Neapolitan pizza, I have so much more material. I can share it. I can answer your questions. So throw any comments in there and I'll drop in with any answers I have. And I can even put up more videos and suggestions if you need them. Head out to Naples, learn from the best.